Welcome back to another voyage into the cosmos. Tonight, we're diving into the hard realities of space travel as portrayed in one of science fiction's most grounded universes. We're talking about the Expanse, where getting from point A to point B isn't just about flipping a switch or jumping to light speed. It's about thrust and fuel, acceleration and deceleration, physics and physiology. It's about the Epstein Drive, the revolutionary engine that opened the solar system to humanity, and the juice, the chemical cocktail that keeps crews alive when physics tries to crush them into paste. Before we embark on this journey through the inner workings of realistic space travel, if you enjoy these deep explorations of science fiction world building, hitting that subscribe button really helps the channel grow. Now, settle in as we unravel the engineering marvel that made humanity a solar system-spanning civilization and the brutal costs that came with it. The revolution that changed everything. Picture Earth in the early 23rd century. Humanity has made it to Mars, established colonies on the moon, set up research stations throughout the inner solar system. But the outer planets, the vast wealth of the asteroid belt, the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, they might as well be on the other side of the galaxy. The problem isn't that we don't want to go there. The problem is time and fuel. Chemical rockets, even the fusion drives of the era, simply can't sustain thrust long enough to make the journey practical. You could get to Jupiter, sure, but it would take years. The propellant mass required would be enormous. Economic exploitation of the outer system seemed like a dream that would remain forever out of reach. The ships of this era used what naval slang called flying tea kettle, superheated steam thrusters for maneuvering and station keeping. For actual interplanetary travel, they relied on fusion torches, pre-Epstein fusion drives that were dangerous, wasteful, and fundamentally limited. These torches couldn't be run continuously. They burned through fuel at rates that made long journeys economically impossible. Worse, they had to be carefully managed near other vessels because the exhaust was deadly. The physics of the rocket equation dominated everything. Every kilogram of payload required exponentially more fuel, and that fuel itself had mass that needed more fuel to move. It was a spiral that kept humanity confined to the inner reaches of the solar system. Mars existed as a colony, not an independent power. The belt was a distant frontier with tremendous mineral wealth, but no viable way to exploit it on the scale needed. The outer planets were scientific curiosities, places you might send a probe, but not destinations for human expansion. Earth remained the center of everything. Not just politically and economically, but practically. If you were born elsewhere, you'd probably die elsewhere too, because the journey back simply wasn't worth the cost. Into this constrained world came Solomon Epstein, a Martian engineer with a small yacht and a big idea. He wasn't trying to revolutionize space travel. He was just tinkering, trying to improve the efficiency of his personal vessel's drive by a few percentage points. What he discovered instead would tear down every limitation humanity faced in space, open up the solar system in ways that had seemed impossible, and in the process cost him his life in one of the most tragic test flights in history. Solomon Epstein, the man behind the drive. Solomon Epstein lived on Mars in the late 22nd century, part of a generation that had been born on the red planet but still thought of themselves as extensions of Earth. The exact date varies between sources, but what matters is that this was roughly 150 years before the main events of the Expanse series. Mars at this time was still very much a colony, dependent on Earth for political legitimacy, economic support, and cultural identity. But there were stirrings of independence, dreams of what Mars could become if it could break free from Earth's grip. Epstein himself dreamed of a future where Mars stood as an equal to Earth, where the red planet wasn't just a frontier outpost but a true civilization in its own right. He worked at the Danbad Nova Research Center, one of the largest facilities on Mars, a city carved into living rock where the best and brightest gathered to push the boundaries of what was possible. It was at one of the local bars, a place where engineers and researchers gathered after long shifts, that Epstein first met Caitlin Esquibel. He was too shy to approach her at first, just another face in the crowd of colleagues, but when he finally worked up the courage to leave, she followed him out, and they walked home together, talking about their work, their dreams, their hopes for Mars's future. That walk home became regular, then constant, and eventually they married. Epstein's passion project was fusion drive efficiency. The existing drives worked, but they were crude, wasteful, limited by how they managed the fusion reaction and directed the exhaust. He believed there was a better way, a method of using magnetic coils to accelerate the exhaust to much higher velocities, extracting more thrust from the same amount of fuel. It was the kind of incremental improvement that engineers chase, the small optimization that might shave a few % off travel times or fuel costs. He didn't expect to change the world. He just wanted to make his 3-person yacht a little more efficient, maybe get better performance for weekend trips around Mars's orbital space. He worked on the modifications in his spare time, running calculations, adjusting the magnetic coil configurations, fine-tuning the fusion reaction parameters. The math looked good. The simulations showed promise. On paper, he might achieve maybe 5 or 10% improvement in efficiency, good enough to make the modifications worthwhile, good enough to be proud of the work. Not revolutionary, just solid engineering. 10 years into their marriage, with the modifications complete, Epstein decided it was time for a test flight. He didn't tell Caitlin exactly what he was doing, didn't make a big production of it. It was just another test, a quick burn to see if the numbers matched the reality. He took his yacht out into Martian orbit, ran through the pre-flight checklist, made sure all the safeties were in place, and activated the modified drive. What happened next unfolded so fast that he barely had time to understand what was going wrong before it was too late to fix it. The drive ignited, and instead of the modest improvement he expected, something else happened entirely. The magnetic coil configuration he'd designed didn't just improve efficiency by a few %. It improved it by orders of magnitude. The exhaust velocity shot through numbers that shouldn't have been possible with existing technology. The thrust built and built, shoving Epstein back into his seat with forces that grew from uncomfortable to crushing to lethal in a matter of minutes. He watched his instruments as the gravity counter climbed past 7 gravities. That was the theoretical maximum his ship's instruments could measure, an indication that the yacht was designed for relatively modest performance. But he knew from the way his body felt, from the way the acceleration kept building, that he was experiencing forces well beyond that. Based on what happened during his 37-hour burn, reaching approximately 5% of light speed, calculations suggest he endured acceleration approaching 11 or 12 gravities continuously, far beyond what any human could survive for more than a few minutes. The speedometer climbed past 5,000 kilometers per hour, then 40,000, and kept going. More than 85% of his fuel remained. At this rate, the burn would continue for more than 30 hours. He tried to reach for the emergency shutoff, but his arm weighed hundreds of pounds. Moving it even a few inches made something pop in his elbow, a joint giving way under stress it was never designed to handle. Epstein's training as an engineer kicked in even as his body began to fail. He started calculating, running the numbers in his head because he couldn't move to input them into a computer. 37 hours of burn time. Acceleration averaging over 11 gravities. Final velocity approaching 5% of the speed of light. He would end up further from the sun than any human had ever traveled, moving faster than any human-made object in history. And there was absolutely nothing he could do about it. The math was elegant in a terrible way. The same improvements that made the drive so efficient made it impossible to stop. The reaction was self-sustaining, perfectly balanced, converting fuel to thrust with an elegance that previous drives had never achieved. Everything was working exactly as designed. The only problem was that the design worked too well. Epstein had accidentally created what spacers would later call a torch drive, an engine capable of sustaining acceleration throughout an entire voyage, something that had been considered theoretically possible, but practically impossible with fusion technology. As the hours crawled past and his body broke down under the unrelenting acceleration, Epstein thought about Caitlin. He thought about the future he'd imagined for them, the children they'd talked about having, the life they were building together on Mars. He thought about his home computer, where he'd saved all his design specifications, all his calculations, every detail of the modifications that had turned a simple efficiency improvement into a revolution in propulsion technology. Caitlin would find those files. She was smart enough to understand what they meant. She could sell the design, set herself up for life. Mars could use this technology to finally break free from Earth's dominance. The physical effects of sustained high-gravity acceleration are brutal and well understood. First, blood begins to pool in the lower extremities. The heart, designed to pump blood against 1 gravity, struggles to move it against 11. Blood pressure in the brain drops. Vision tunnels, then darkens. Consciousness fades in and out. Meanwhile, the bones and joints compress under the multiplied weight. Internal organs shift, press against each other, begin to fail. Minor blood vessels rupture throughout the body. Eventually, the cardiovascular system simply gives up, unable to maintain circulation against the relentless acceleration. Solomon Epstein died somewhere in the first few hours of what would become a 37-hour burn. His yacht, following the trajectory his final acceleration had given it, sailed out of the solar system at roughly 5% of light speed. With a good telescope, you can still see it heading into the big empty, moving too fast for anything humanity possessed to catch. The longest funeral in the history of mankind, as one historian would later describe it. His body is still out there, entombed in the vessel that became his monument, forever accelerating toward the stars he helped humanity reach. But Caitlin did find the files on his home computer. She understood immediately what she was looking at, what her husband had accidentally created in his quest for marginal improvements. She sold the design to Mars for a fortune that set her up for the rest of her life. More importantly, she gave Mars the key to independence. The Epstein Drive, as it came to be called, changed everything. Earth had been considering suppressing Mars's growing independence movement, using its military superiority to crush the colony's dreams of sovereignty. But Mars now had technology that made Earth's threats irrelevant. In exchange for sharing the Epstein Drive with Earth, allowing both powers to colonize the outer system together, Mars gained recognition as an independent nation, the Martian Congressional Republic. Solomon Epstein's sacrifice, unintentional though it was, gave Mars its freedom and gave humanity the solar system. It's a legacy built on tragedy, but it's a legacy that fundamentally reshaped human civilization. The engineering marvel of the Epstein Drive. So, what exactly makes the Epstein Drive so revolutionary? At its core, it's still a fusion rocket, using the same basic principle as the pre-Epstein fusion torches. You contain a fusion reaction, typically using deuterium or other hydrogen isotopes as fuel, and direct the resulting high-energy plasma out the back of the ship as thrust. The fundamental physics haven't changed, but Epstein's innovation was in how that plasma gets directed and accelerated. The key is the magnetic coil exhaust acceleration system. Previous fusion drives let the fusion products expand and exit the engine with relatively low exhaust velocities. They were limited by the physical constraints of the reaction chamber, the materials that had to contain the fusion, the ways heat could be managed and directed. Epstein's configuration uses powerful magnetic fields to compress and accelerate the exhaust far beyond what thermal expansion alone could achieve. The plasma gets squeezed, focused, and shot out the back at velocities that approach significant fractions of the speed of light. Think about what this means in practical terms. Exhaust velocity is everything in rocketry. The faster your exhaust moves, the more efficiently you convert fuel into thrust. Chemical rockets have exhaust velocities of a few kilometers per second. Early fusion drives might manage 20 or 30 kilometers per second. Based on technical analyses of the drive's performance throughout the series, the Epstein Drive appears to achieve exhaust velocities measured in thousands of kilometers per second. Some estimates, based on observed ship capabilities, suggest velocities approaching 19,000 kilometers per second, which would be roughly 6 to 7% of light speed. This isn't just an improvement. It's a fundamental jump to a new category of propulsion. The specific impulse, which measures how efficiently a drive uses propellant, represents a massive leap forward. Chemical rockets have specific impulses measured in hundreds of seconds. Technical analyses of the Epstein drive suggest it could achieve specific impulses approaching 2 million seconds, based on the performance characteristics we see throughout the series. In practical terms, this means a ship with an Epstein drive can accelerate continuously for weeks or even months without exhausting its fuel supply, something that would have been impossible with earlier technology. But the real genius is in the sustained burn capability. Pre-Epstein drives had to be used in short bursts, carefully managed pulses of thrust that would get you moving in the right direction, but couldn't be maintained for long periods. They generated too much waste heat, used fuel too quickly, and put too much stress on the ship's structure. The Epstein drive can run continuously throughout an entire voyage. This changes everything about how you navigate the solar system. With a traditional drive, you do what's called a Hohmann transfer. You fire your engines just enough to enter an elliptical orbit that will eventually intersect with your destination. Then you coast for months, essentially falling through space on a path determined by that initial burn and the gravitational forces acting on your ship. When you finally reach your destination, you fire the engines again to match velocities and enter orbit. It's fuel efficient, but it takes forever. Earth to Mars, using a Hohmann transfer, takes about 9 months under optimal alignment conditions. The Epstein drive lets you do something completely different, something that spacers call the flip and burn. You accelerate constantly toward your destination for half the journey, building up tremendous velocity. At the halfway point, you flip your ship around 180 degrees and burn in the opposite direction, using your engines to decelerate for the second half of the trip. You arrive at your destination with 0 relative velocity, ready to dock or enter orbit without any complicated maneuvering. This cuts travel time dramatically compared to traditional orbital transfers. The exact times vary based on planetary alignments and the acceleration used, but the transformation is remarkable. What once took 9 months using Hohmann transfers becomes a journey measured in days or weeks. The moon becomes reachable in hours rather than days. Mars, depending on its position relative to Earth, can be reached in anywhere from a few days to a couple of weeks with comfortable acceleration. Jupiter and the outer planets, once requiring years of travel time, become accessible in weeks or months. Even Neptune, at the far edge of the solar system, can be reached in a reasonable time frame rather than the multi-year journeys that would have been required with pre-Epstein technology. The drive technology comes in various models and configurations, optimized for different ship sizes and purposes. The UN's S-250 series powers the older Leonidas-class battleships, proven but less efficient than modern designs. The S-400 series on Truman-class dreadnoughts represents more advanced UN technology. Mars, generally ahead in drive efficiency, uses the RT-10 Kaminari drives on its massive Doniger-class battleships, ships that serve as the backbone of Martian naval power. The Rocinante itself, a Martian Corvette-class light frigate that becomes central to so much of the solar system's history, uses advanced military-grade Epstein technology that gives it performance characteristics well beyond what most civilian vessels can achieve. The largest Epstein drives ever built powered the Nauvoo, later renamed Behemoth, a generation ship constructed by the Mormon Church for a journey beyond the solar system. These G4000 series drives were designed to sustain thrust not for days or weeks, but for decades, pushing a ship the size of a small asteroid to velocities that would eventually reach other stars. The fact that such a vessel could be built at all, that humanity possessed the technology to even attempt interstellar colonization, speaks to how far the Epstein drive pushed the boundaries of what was possible. At the bleeding edge of Epstein technology are drives like the Destrier 4 that powers the Razorback, a racing pinnace that pushes performance into dangerous territory. These supercharged drives sacrifice fuel efficiency and operational safety for raw acceleration, capable of putting out forces that can kill even trained pilots if pushed to their limits. They're the sports cars of space, built for speed rather than practicality, demonstrating just how far Epstein technology can be pushed when constraints like long-range capability and crew safety are relaxed. The engineering challenge isn't just in the drive itself, but in how ships are designed around it. Every Expanse vessel is essentially a tower or needle shape, with the drive at one end and the crew spaces stacked perpendicular to the thrust axis. When the drive is firing, that thrust creates artificial gravity. The deck becomes the floor, and you can walk around normally. This is called thrust gravity, and it's the primary way crews experience anything like normal weight. When the drive shuts off, you're back to zero gravity, floating through the corridors, using handholds and mag boots to navigate. This architectural requirement shapes everything about how ships look and function. There's no aerodynamic considerations in space, so ships don't need to be streamlined. What they need is efficient use of the space along the thrust axis, which means tall, narrow profiles. The Rocinante, like most military vessels, has multiple decks stacked vertically, with ladders that become stairways when under acceleration. Civilian freighters like the Canterbury, the ice hauler that kicks off so much of the series' conflict, have huge cargo sections stacked along their length, with relatively small crew areas tucked into the less valuable space. Heat management becomes a critical engineering challenge. Fusion reactions generate enormous amounts of waste heat, and in the vacuum of space, you can't rely on convection or conduction to get rid of it. Ships need massive radiator panels that can unfold when the drive is running, radiating heat away as infrared light. These radiators are often the most vulnerable parts of a ship in combat, which is why military vessels sometimes use retractable designs that can be pulled in when battle is imminent. Damage your radiators and you can't run your drive. Can't run your drive and you're a sitting target, drifting helplessly while your enemy maneuvers around you. The Epstein Drive, for all its revolutionary capabilities, still obeys the laws of physics. It's not magic. It's extremely advanced engineering, but it's engineering that works within the constraints of reality. You need reaction mass, and that mass has weight that you have to accelerate. You generate heat that has to be dissipated. You create thrust that subjects your crew to acceleration forces that can kill them if mismanaged. The drive opened up the solar system, but it didn't make space travel easy or safe. It just made it possible. Delta V, the currency of space. In The Expanse, you'll often hear characters talking about Delta V, usually in tense situations where they're trying to figure out if they have enough to reach safety or intercept a target. Delta V literally means change in velocity, but in practical terms, it's the fundamental currency of space travel. It's how much your ship can change its speed and direction before running out of fuel. Every burn costs Delta V. Every course correction, every acceleration, every deceleration. Once you're out of Delta V, you're drifting. And in space, drifting usually means dying. The concept is central to understanding how space travel actually works. On Earth, if you're driving a car and you run out of gas, you coast to a stop and call for help. In space, there's no friction to stop you. If you're moving, you keep moving at that exact velocity in that exact direction, forever, unless you fire your engines to change it. Run out of fuel while moving at high speed in the wrong direction, and you're on a ballistic trajectory that you can't alter. Your ship becomes a tomb on a one-way trip to nowhere useful. Delta V budgeting is therefore the first thing you do when planning any journey. You calculate how much Delta V you need to reach your destination, including acceleration, the flip maneuver at the halfway point, and deceleration at the end. Then you add a safety margin for course corrections, because space is big and navigation isn't perfect. You factor in the mass of your ship, your cargo, your crew, everything that needs to be accelerated, and you make absolutely sure you have enough fuel to provide that total Delta V, because there are no gas stations in space, no convenient ports to stop at if you cut it too close. The Epstein Drive's efficiency means ships can carry reasonable amounts of fuel and still have enormous Delta V budgets. A military frigate like the Rocinante might have enough Delta V to travel from Earth to the outer system and back several times over. A cargo hauler like the Canterbury, loaded with ice from Saturn's rings, has less margin because so much of its mass is cargo, but it still has enough to make the run to Ceres Station with safety to spare. Ships are rated by their Delta V capacity the same way cars are rated by fuel economy. It's the number that determines what missions they can fly, what routes they can take, what risks they can afford. Combat. Delta V becomes a matter of life and death. Every evasive maneuver burns precious fuel. Every attempt to close with an enemy or escape from a pursuer costs Delta V that might be needed later. Commanders have to make brutal calculations about whether they can afford to dodge incoming fire or whether they need to tank the hit and preserve fuel for essential maneuvers. Run out of Delta V in the middle of a battle, and you're a stationary target. Your enemy can take their time positioning for the kill shot while you float helplessly, unable to burn, unable to maneuver, unable to do anything but wait for the end. This creates a completely different dynamic than space battles in most science fiction. There are no dogfights, No chasing each other through asteroid fields, making split-second turns. Combat in the Expanse is about geometry, about calculating vectors and intercept courses, about managing your delta-V budget while trying to force your enemy to waste theirs. It's more like submarine warfare than fighter combat, tense and calculating, where the battle is often decided by math long before the first shot is fired. The flip and burn maneuver, which sounds simple enough in principle, is actually a complex delta-V calculation. You need to know your current velocity, your destination's position and velocity, and the exact point where flipping and decelerating will bring you to rest relative to your target. Get the math wrong, and you either overshoot, sailing past your destination with no fuel left to turn around, or you come up short, stranded in space, with your target maddeningly out of reach. Ships have sophisticated navigation computers that handle these calculations, but they're still constrained by the fundamental physics of delta-V. The beauty of the Epstein Drive is that it provides enough delta-V for these maneuvers to become routine. Pre-Epstein, a flip and burn to Mars would have used your entire fuel supply with nothing to spare. With an Epstein, you can flip and burn to Mars and still have enough delta-V left over to maneuver in orbit, land on the surface if your ship is rated for it, take off again, and fly back to Earth. This surplus of delta-V is what made the solar system accessible. It turned what would have been one-way suicide missions into routine cargo runs. But delta-V is never unlimited. Even with an Epstein Drive, there are missions that will stretch a ship to its limits. Long-range scientific expeditions to the outer planets might use 90% or more of a ship's total delta-V, leaving minimal margin for error. Rescue missions, where you need to match velocities with a disabled ship that might be on a bad trajectory, can burn through your budget fast. And in warfare, the delta-V calculations become exponentially more complex when you're trying to intercept a target that's actively evading, spending their own delta-V to make your job harder. The solar system's geography is defined by delta-V as much as by physical distance. Some places are easy to reach, requiring relatively little delta-V because their orbits align well with high traffic routes. Other locations, technically closer in terms of raw distance, might be practically inaccessible because reaching them would require delta-V budgets that no reasonable ship could carry. The belt, that vast collection of asteroids between Mars and Jupiter, becomes the economic engine of human civilization, partly because its lower gravity wells mean lower delta-V costs for landing and launching. You can exploit the resources there without the massive fuel expenditure required to lift materials out of a planetary gravity well. Mars, with its lighter gravity compared to Earth, has a similar advantage. Launching from Mars requires significantly less delta-V than launching from Earth, which is part of why Mars becomes such a naval power. They can build ships, fuel them, and send them out into the system more efficiently than Earth can. The Martian Congressional Republic's military superiority comes partly from technology, but also from pure delta-V economics. Every kilogram of payload costs less fuel to launch from Mars, which means their ships can carry more weapons, more armor, more sophisticated systems for the same fuel budget. Earth, massive and with deep gravity well, becomes somewhat disadvantaged despite its larger population and industrial base. Yes, they can build bigger ships, but those ships cost more to launch and more to operate. The UN Navy wins through numbers and brute force, while the Martian Navy wins through efficiency and superior delta-V economics. The belt, with effectively no gravity wells to escape, has the best delta-V economics of all, which is part of why the belters eventually become a force that the inner planets have to reckon with. Understanding delta-V is essential to understanding the Expanse's universe. It's not just a technical detail for the engineering-minded. It's the fundamental constraint that shapes strategy, economics, and survival. Every character, whether they explicitly discuss it or not, is always aware of their delta-V budget, always calculating whether they have enough to complete their mission, always worried about what happens if they run out. In space, delta-V is life, and running out means death. The Epstein Drive gave humanity the ability to earn that currency in amounts that made solar civilization possible. But it's still a limited resource, and managing it well is the difference between coming home and becoming another derelict drifting through the black. The juice, surviving the crush. For all the revolutionary capabilities of the Epstein Drive, there's one problem it can't solve: biology. Human bodies evolved under one gravity of acceleration, the pull of Earth at sea level. We're adapted to it, built for it, comfortable in it. When you start experiencing multiple gravities of acceleration, when your body weight suddenly doubles or triples, or worse, human-machine starts to break down in ways that can kill you quickly and messily. Fighter pilots in the 21st century experience something similar when pulling high G turns. The blood in their body wants to keep moving in its original direction, which means it pools in their lower extremities while their heart struggles to pump it up to their brain. Vision tunnels as blood pressure in the brain drops. This is called G-induced loss of consciousness, or G-lock. You black out, lose control of your aircraft, and die. To prevent this, fighter pilots wear G-suits that squeeze their legs and abdomen, forcing blood back up toward the heart and brain. They also learn to do what's called the AGSM, the anti-G straining maneuver, tensing their muscles and controlling their breathing to help maintain blood pressure. But fighter pilots only experience high G forces for a few seconds or minutes at most during combat maneuvers. In the Expanse, when ships burn hard, the acceleration can last for minutes, hours, or even longer. The forces can be even higher, 6 or 7 or 8 gravities, well beyond what an unprotected human can survive. This is where the juice comes in. The juice, known more formally as acceleration drugs or gravity fluids, is a cocktail of chemicals injected into the crew before high G burns. The exact composition isn't fully detailed in the source material, but we know the basic categories of what it contains. Blood thinners to help the cardiovascular system cope with the increased strain. Blood vessel reinforcers, compounds that strengthen artery and vein walls so they don't rupture under the pressure. adrenaline and other stimulants to keep the crew alert and functional, compounds that help the heart maintain its rhythm and pumping capacity under extreme load. In military formulations, the cocktail likely includes cognitive enhancers, drugs that keep the mind sharp even when the body is being crushed by acceleration. The injection system is built into the crash couches where crew members ride out high-G burns. When the pilot or commander calls for juice, automated systems or manual controls trigger injectors that pump the cocktail directly into the crew's bloodstream, usually through their legs or back. The stuff burns going in. It's not a pleasant experience even before the high G starts, but it's absolutely necessary if you're going to pull acceleration above what the human body can naturally handle. With the juice in their system, crew members can survive acceleration that would otherwise kill them. 6 or 7 gravities becomes survivable, though deeply unpleasant. Their body weighs hundreds of kilograms. Every movement requires enormous effort. Breathing is difficult because their chest weighs so much that their muscles struggle to expand their lungs. But they stay conscious. Their hearts keep pumping. Their blood vessels don't explode. They can continue to function, to operate their stations, to make the decisions and take the actions that keep the ship running. Military crews train extensively for high-G operations. They practice in centrifuges that simulate the forces they'll experience in combat. They learn how to move efficiently when every limb weighs what a full-grown person weighs. They develop the muscle memory to operate controls and systems when even turning your head feels like lifting a boulder. Martian Marines, who train for ground combat on Earth, regularly drill at 1 gravity, even though Mars's native gravity is only about 1/3 of Earth's. This conditioning gives them an edge in high-G situations that belters who grow up in low or 0 gravity can never match without extensive training. But the juice isn't magic. It helps, but it doesn't eliminate the danger. Prolonged high-G burns, even with the juice, carry serious risk of stroke. Blood clots can form despite the thinners. Blood vessels can rupture despite the reinforcers. The heart can go into arrhythmia despite the stabilizers. Bones can fracture under the strain if the crew member isn't properly positioned in their crash couch. And there's always the risk that the drugs themselves will cause problems. Allergic reactions or interactions with other medications, or simple bad batches that do more harm than good. Coming down from high-G burns is its own kind of hell. The juice keeps you functional during the acceleration, but it doesn't come free. Once the burn ends and the drug cocktail clears your system, you're left with what amounts to a severe hangover, combined with the aftermath of running multiple marathons. Nausea is universal. Blurred vision, common. Broken blood vessels create spectacular bruising. Muscle aches make every movement agony. If the burn was particularly long or intense, you might be looking at broken ribs, stress fractures, internal injuries that need medical attention. The recovery time can be hours or even days, depending on how hard the burn was and how tough your individual physiology is. Interestingly, there are indications that belters, despite being physically weaker and less able to handle gravity in general, may actually recover faster from high-G burns than Earthers or Martians in some circumstances. The physiological mechanism isn't fully explained, but this could suggest that their body's general unfamiliarity with constant gravity makes them more adaptable to extreme variations. They suffer just as much during the burn itself, but once it's over, they might bounce back quicker. It's a curious potential advantage that belters have in the high-G game, despite all their other disadvantages when it comes to dealing with sustained gravitational forces. Most commercial operations try to keep acceleration below 4 gravities. This is survivable with the juice and doesn't risk the kind of serious injuries that higher burns cause. Military operations routinely go higher, 6 to 8 gravities for combat maneuvers, sometimes even more in desperate situations. Based on what we see throughout the series, capital ships like the Doniger-class battleships appear capable of pushing 8 to 10 gravities near the top end of their drive capacity. Smaller, more maneuverable ships like the Rocinante can achieve even higher accelerations in short bursts. The Razorback racing pinnace, with its supercharged Destrier 4 drive, demonstrates acceleration capabilities that push well into the teens of gravities, though doing so is incredibly dangerous and only used in the most extreme circumstances, or by pilots willing to risk everything for speed. The decision to go high G is never taken lightly. Commanders weigh the tactical necessity against the risk to their crew. In combat, sometimes you have no choice. The enemy torpedo tracking toward you will kill everyone if it hits, so you pull a desperate high-G evasive burn that breaks bones and ruptures organs, but might just save the ship. Better some of your crew injured than all of your crew dead. But outside of combat, commercial ships and civilian vessels try to avoid high-G burns altogether. The medical costs, the recovery time, the simple human misery of it, all make it something you only do when absolutely necessary. The juice represents a fundamental truth about the Expanse's universe. Technology has made the solar system accessible, but it hasn't made it safe or comfortable. The Epstein Drive can push your ship to incredible accelerations, but your soft human body still has limits that chemistry can only partially overcome. You can reach Mars in 3 days instead of 9 months, but those 3 days will hurt in ways that the longer journey never would have. Speed comes at a price, and that price is paid in the bodies of the crews who run the ships. This creates a fascinating dynamic where the same technology that enables human expansion also constantly threatens to destroy the humans using it. The drive that opened up the solar system can also kill you if you push it too hard. The juice that keeps you alive during hard burns can also poison you if used too frequently. Space travel in the Expanse is a constant negotiation between what's physically possible and what's biologically survivable. The engineers can build ships that accelerate at 20 gravities. The question is whether you can find humans willing and able to ride them. Life aboard, operational realities. Living and working on a ship powered by an Epstein drive means adapting to an environment that constantly shifts between fundamentally different states. When the drive is burning, you have thrust gravity. The deck beneath your feet feels solid, almost like being planet-side. You can walk normally. Objects stay where you put them. Water pours downward from a cup. The ship feels like a building, albeit a building that's accelerating through space at forces that would be unthinkable on Earth. Then the drive shuts off, and everything changes. Suddenly you're in zero gravity, floating free, using handholds and mag boots to navigate. Objects drift away if not secured. Liquids form floating spheres that you have to catch before they drift into electronics and cause shorts. Your inner ear, which relies on gravity to tell you which way is up, gets confused, leading to disorientation and nausea until you adapt. Moving through the ship becomes a three-dimensional problem instead of a two-dimensional one. The ceiling becomes just another surface, no different from the walls or floor. This constant transition between thrust gravity and zero-G shapes everything about how ships are designed and operated. Every object needs to be secured somehow, either tied down, magnetically attached, or stored in sealed compartments. Electronics and critical systems need to be positioned where they won't be damaged by floating debris when the drive cuts out. The galley has to work in both gravity and zero-G, which means food preparation is limited to things that won't become hazardous projectiles or contaminate the air when weightless. Water systems have to be designed with zero-G in mind, using suction and sealed containers rather than relying on gravity to move liquids where they need to go. Crew quarters on military vessels are typically small, efficient spaces stacked along the ship's central axis. Each crew member gets a bunk that can be secured for high G burns, some personal storage, and not much else. The racks, as they're called, are often built into the walls in ways that make sense when the ship is under thrust, but look sideways or upside down when you're floating in zero-G. Privacy is minimal. Sound carries through the corridors. You learn to sleep through the constant background noise of the ship's systems. The hum of the reactor. The clicks and bangs of thermal expansion and contraction as radiators extend and retract. Larger ships, capital vessels like the Donager, or civilian cruise liners, have the luxury of rotating sections that provide spin gravity even when the main drive isn't burning. These rotating drums or rings spin around the ship's central axis, creating centrifugal force that mimics gravity. It's not quite the same as thrust gravity or planetary gravity. There's a Coriolis effect that makes moving feel slightly off, like everything has a weird sideways component to its motion. But it's far better than zero-G for long-term health, preventing the bone loss and muscle atrophy that plague people who spend too much time weightless. The Nauvoo, that generation ship designed for the Mormon Church's interstellar mission, was built almost entirely as a rotating drum. The whole ship would spin to provide gravity for the thousands of colonists who'd spend decades or centuries traveling between stars. When it was later converted into a warship and renamed the Behemoth, then later the Medina Station, those rotating sections became neighborhoods and commercial districts for the growing population living there. Spin gravity isn't perfect, but for stationary habitats, it's the best solution humanity has found for providing something like normal living conditions in space. Hygiene in space requires careful thought. Showers exist on larger ships, but they're complicated affairs involving vacuum suction to pull water off your body rather than letting it spray everywhere. On smaller vessels or during zero-G coast phases, crew members often make do with sponge baths, using damp cloths to clean themselves and carefully disposing of the water afterward. Toilets are even more complex, using suction and sealed systems to deal with waste that won't simply fall into the bowl in zero-G. It's not glamorous, but it's essential engineering that makes long-term space habitation possible. Food in space has come a long way from the squeeze tubes and freeze-dried powder of early space exploration. Ships with galleys can prepare real meals, though the selection is limited by what can be stored for long periods and what's practical to prepare in variable gravity. Fresh food is a luxury, available primarily near stations or planets where resupply is possible. Most crews rely on preserved rations, protein that comes in vacuum-sealed packages, synthetic vegetables grown in hydroponics bays if the ship is large enough, and processed carbohydrates that store well and provide calories if not much in the way of flavor. The act of eating changes between gravity states. Under thrust, meals look fairly normal, with plates and utensils working more or less as they would planetside. In zero-G, everything has to be eaten from sealed containers or bags, carefully managed so food doesn't escape and float around the cabin. Liquids are particularly tricky, consumed through straws or suction bulbs. Coffee, that universal necessity of military and commercial crews alike, comes in sealed pouches that you squeeze rather than cups you drink from. It's not the same experience as sitting at a cafe on Earth, but after enough time in space, you get used to it. Medical facilities on ships range from full surgical bays on military capital ships to barely more than first aid kits on small civilian vessels. The Rocinante, as a military corvette, has a proper medical bay with an autodock, a sophisticated automated surgical system that can handle trauma, perform complex procedures, and keep critically injured crew alive until they can reach a hospital. The autodock becomes crucial multiple times throughout the Rocinante's adventures, treating injuries that would have been fatal without immediate surgical intervention that no human surgeon aboard could have provided. Combat operations aboard ship are exercises in controlled chaos, coordinated through rigid discipline. When battle stations are called, crew members seal themselves into crash couches at their stations, inject the juice, and prepare for violent maneuvering that can come with almost no warning. The pilot, typically positioned in a crash couch near the bridge or in a dedicated cockpit, controls the ship's movement, making split-second decisions about thrust, rotation, and trajectory. The tactical officer manages weapon systems, calculating firing solutions while accounting for the relative velocities of both ships and the travel time of torpedoes or PDC rounds. The electronic warfare officer handles sensors and countermeasures, trying to blind the enemy while keeping friendly sensors operational. The captain, or commanding officer, coordinates everything, making the strategic decisions about whether to engage or flee, where to position the ship, when to burn Delta V for tactical advantage. It's a job that requires understanding physics, tactics, psychology, and leadership all at once. Good captains like James Holden keep their crew alive through thousands of bad situations. Poor captains get their crews killed when they make errors in judgment or calculation that space doesn't forgive. Point defense cannons, the PDCs that form a ship's last line of defense against incoming torpedoes, are typically automated. Human reaction times simply aren't fast enough to track and target objects moving at torpedo velocities in the midst of complex maneuvering. The computer systems handle the targeting and firing, but they need constant monitoring and override capability in case they lock on to the wrong target or fail to recognize a genuine threat. The weapons are usually positioned around the ship's hull to provide coverage from all angles, capable of rotating to track targets in any direction. Torpedoes, the main offensive weapon of space combat, are essentially smaller ships in their own right, with their own drives, sensors, and guidance systems. They can pursue targets, adjust their courses, even split into multiple warheads to overwhelm point defenses. Launching a torpedo is a complex calculation involving the target's current position and velocity, their likely evasive maneuvers, and the time it will take for the torpedo to close the distance. Miss the shot, and you've wasted a weapon that cost as much as a small spacecraft. Hit, and you've potentially crippled or destroyed an enemy vessel in a single strike. Railguns, massive magnetic accelerators that hurl projectiles at significant fractions of the speed of light, represent the other primary weapon system on larger ships. They're essentially scaled-up versions of the technology that makes the Epstein Drive work, using magnetic fields to accelerate metal slugs to velocities where their kinetic energy alone is devastating. A railgun slug hitting a ship can punch clean through armor, through multiple compartments, through the opposite side of the hull. If it hits anything vital on the way through, the ship is finished. But railguns have their own limitations. The slugs travel in straight lines, can't adjust course after firing, and take time to reach their target. Against an alert enemy with Delta V to spare for evasion, railguns are difficult to use effectively. Damage control, when the ship takes a hit, becomes everyone's problem. Hull breaches need to be sealed immediately before too much atmosphere escapes. Fire in a spaceship is a nightmare scenario because there's nowhere for the smoke to go. And using water to fight it creates floating droplets that can short out electronics. Suppression systems use vacuum or chemical foam, cutting off the fire's oxygen supply. Injured crew need immediate triage and treatment. Systems that fail need workarounds or rapid repairs. All of this happens while the ship might still be under fire, still maneuvering, still fighting for survival. The psychological toll of this kind of existence is substantial. You're living in a metal container, hurtling through vacuum, at speeds that would vaporize you instantly if you were exposed to them. You're trusting your life to systems that can fail, to engineering that can be damaged, to calculations that can be wrong. Combat can come with little warning, and when it does, you're strapped into a chair, being crushed by acceleration while trying to do your job as people try to kill you from directions you can't see, with weapons you can't dodge. Long-duration missions become tests of mental endurance as much as physical capability. Crews develop tight bonds because you're living in each other's pockets, dependent on each other for survival, sharing the same risks and hardships. But those same close quarters can generate conflict when personalities clash or stress builds up with nowhere to release it. Ship's counselors or medical officers trained in psychology become essential personnel on longer voyages, helping crew members manage the mental health challenges of extended space deployment. Shore leave, when ships dock at stations or planetary ports, becomes essential for crew welfare. The chance to experience different surroundings, to interact with people outside your immediate crew, to feel real planetary gravity or spin gravity that isn't constantly shifting. All of these provide psychological relief that keeps crews functional. Ceres Station, the largest settlement in the belt and a major hub for commerce and shipping, serves as a popular liberty port where spacers can drink, gamble, visit entertainment venues, and generally decompress from the stress of ship life. But even station life reminds you that you're in space. Ceres, like most belt stations, is a hollowed-out asteroid spinning to provide gravity. The horizons curve upward instead of downward. If you look up from the surface level, you can see the opposite side of the station's interior overhead. Buildings and lights hanging above you in defiance of common sense. The gravity is lower than Earth's, roughly a third of a G, which takes some getting used to if you're from the inner planets. Jump too hard and you'll sail higher than you intended, potentially injuring yourself when you come back down. The operational realities of the Epstein Drive have thus created a whole culture of spacers people who are equally comfortable in variable gravity, who think in terms of vectors and delta V, who understand instinctively how ships move and what's required to live aboard them. These aren't tourists or passengers. They're professional crew members whose skills are essential to solar civilization's functioning. Without them, the ships don't fly, the cargo doesn't move, and the economic system that spans the solar system collapses. The three worlds: how drives shaped cultures. The Epstein Drive didn't just make space travel practical. It fundamentally reshaped human civilization, creating distinct cultures and political entities whose characteristics were defined by where they lived and how they related to the technology of travel and acceleration. By the time the main story of the Expanse unfolds, humanity has effectively fractured into three major cultural groups: Earth, Mars, and the Belt. Each has its own identity, its own advantages and disadvantages, and its own relationship with the physics that govern their lives. Earth remains the ancestral home, the planet where humanity evolved, where billions still live in cities and nations that predate space travel. It has the advantages of deep history, massive population, enormous industrial capacity, and natural gravity that keeps people strong and healthy without artificial intervention. But Earth's problems are equally massive. Climate change and environmental degradation have made large portions of the planet uninhabitable, or barely habitable. Overpopulation strains resources. The majority of Earth's population survives on basic assistance, government support that provides minimal food and shelter but no real opportunity for advancement or purpose. Earth's relationship with the Epstein Drive is complicated by its massive gravity well. Launching ships from Earth requires enormous amounts of delta V just to reach orbit, and even more to achieve escape velocity. This makes Earth expensive as a port of departure, even with the most advanced drives. Earth compensates through sheer scale, building massive shipyards in orbit where vessels can be constructed without fighting gravity, maintaining the largest military fleet in the solar system through brute force manufacturing capability. The United Nations Navy doesn't have the most efficient ships or the best technology, but it has numbers that Mars and the Belt can't match. Culturally, Earth represents tradition and authority, but also stagnation. It's a planet looking backward to lost glory, while struggling to maintain relevance in a solar system where being the birthplace of humanity matters less with each passing generation. Earth's government, the United Nations, tries to maintain control through military power and political maneuvering. But it's fighting a losing battle against the inevitable diffusion of power to the frontier settlements that Earth's technology made possible. Mars represents humanity's future, or at least what Martians believe humanity's future should be. The Martian Congressional Republic exists for a single overriding purpose: terraforming Mars into a second Earth. Every aspect of Martian society is organized around this goal. Children grow up learning that their sacrifices, their hard work, their dedication to the Republic all serve the dream of making Mars a garden planet with breathable atmosphere, liquid water oceans, and ecosystems that don't require pressure domes. This unified purpose gives Martian culture a discipline and focus that Earth lacks. Martians train harder, study more rigorously, push themselves to excellence because they believe they're building something unprecedented. The Martian military, the Martian Congressional Republic Navy, is smaller than Earth's but far more advanced technologically. Every ship, every weapon system, every piece of equipment represents the cutting edge of what's possible. Martian Marines train at 1 full Earth gravity, even though Mars's native gravity is only 0.376 g, roughly a third of Earth standard. This makes them physically superior to Belters and competitive with Earthers in ground combat, while giving them advantages in high-G space operations. Mars's relationship with the Epstein Drive is more favorable than Earth's. Lower gravity means launching from Mars costs less delta V, which translates to more efficient ship operations and lower overall costs for space missions. With Mars's gravity at roughly 0.376 of Earth standard, this economic advantage helps partially offset Earth's larger population and industrial base. Mars can't build as many ships as Earth, but the ships it does build can go further and do more with the same amount of fuel. The Donnager-class battleships that serve as the backbone of the MCRN fleet represent technological achievements that, ship for ship, can match multiple UN vessels in combat. But Mars's culture has a dark side. The single-minded focus on terraforming creates a society with limited tolerance for deviation or dissent. If you're not contributing to the dream, you're dead weight. The pressure to excel is immense, starting in childhood and never really letting up. And there's a growing question, never spoken aloud but increasingly present. What happens when the terraforming is complete? What does Martian culture become when it achieves its defining goal? Is there anything beyond the dream? Or is Mars a civilization that will lose its purpose when it finally wins? The belt represents something entirely different. The Belters, inhabitants of the asteroid belt and outer planet moons, are humanity's working class. The people who mine the resources that feed the inner planet's industries. They didn't choose to be born in low-gravity environments. Many are descendants of workers who came out to the belt for jobs and ended up staying because they couldn't afford passage back to the inner planets, or because their children, born in low gravity, could never survive in Earth's crushing weight. Belter physiology adapts to low gravity across generations. They grow taller, thinner, their bones less dense because they don't need to support body weight against significant gravity. Their cardiovascular systems become less robust because they don't have to pump blood against gravitational force. An adult belter might be 6.5 feet tall, but weigh only 130 pounds. In zero-G or low-G, this physiology is advantageous, efficient, perfectly adapted to the environment. But put a belter in Earth gravity, and they're crippled. Their bones break under the weight. Their hearts can't maintain circulation. Most belters can never visit Earth even if they could afford the trip, because the gravity would kill them. This creates a permanent underclass of humanity who are literally physically unable to access their species' home world. The psychological impact is profound. Belters develop their own culture, their own language, Belter Creole or Lang Belta, a mix of English, various Earth languages, and unique constructions born from their particular circumstances. They develop their own values, their own sense of identity that's separate from and often antagonistic toward the inner planets. The belt's relationship with the Epstein Drive is the most favorable of all three cultures. Asteroids and small moons have negligible gravity, which means effectively zero delta-V cost for launching. A ship leaving Ceres station needs only to overcome the station's spin gravity, not any significant gravitational well. This makes the belt extremely efficient for shipping operations. Raw materials mined from asteroids can be processed and shipped to the inner planets or outer system colonies without the massive fuel costs associated with planetary launches. This efficiency should make the belt wealthy, but instead, the belters remain exploited and poor. Earth and Mars control the economy, set the prices for the water and air and resources that belters mine. The belters do the dangerous work of harvesting ice from Saturn's rings, extracting minerals from asteroids, maintaining the infrastructure that keeps supplies flowing throughout the system. In return, they get minimal compensation, paid in scrip that can only be used at company stores, living in conditions that would be considered unacceptable in the inner planets. The Belters' anger at this exploitation drives much of the Expanse's political conflict. The Outer Planets Alliance, initially a loose coalition of labor unions and political movements, eventually becomes a military force willing to use terrorism and warfare to fight for Belter independence. The OPA's claim is simple. The Belt produces the resources that make the inner planet's comfort possible, but the Belters themselves see almost none of the benefits. It's colonialism on a solar system scale, with the Belt as the exploited colony and Earth and Mars as the imperial powers extracting wealth. The Epstein Drive thus created a solar system where physical location determines not just where you live, but who you are, what your body can do, where you can go, and what opportunities are available to you. An Earther can visit Mars or the Belt if they can afford it, though Mars' gravity will be challenging, and the Belt's zero-G will take adaptation. A Martian can visit Earth with preparation and difficulty, and can handle the Belt easily, but a Belter is locked out of both Earth and Mars, unable to survive in the gravity that shaped humanity's evolution, confined forever to the low-G environments of the outer system. This geographical determinism creates political tensions that the Epstein Drive's revolutionary capabilities can't solve. Yes, you can travel anywhere in the solar system in days or weeks instead of months or years, but the ease of travel doesn't overcome the fundamental physical differences between populations, doesn't eliminate the economic exploitation, doesn't erase the resentment and anger that builds when one group has all the advantages and another group does all the work. The drive opened up the solar system, but it also created new forms of inequality and conflict based on where you happened to be born. It gave Mars the technology to dream of independence from Earth. It gave the Belt the efficiency to be economically vital while remaining politically powerless. And it gave Earth the capability to maintain control through military force, even as its moral authority and practical relevance declined. The three worlds coexist in an uneasy balance, trading with each other because they must, each dependent on the others for resources or technology or markets they can't provide themselves. Earth needs the Belt's raw materials and Mars's advanced technology. Mars needs Earth's population and manufacturing base and the Belt's resources. The Belt needs everything from the inner planets because they can't grow food or manufacture complex goods on the scale required for their population. No faction can survive in isolation, but none trusts the others, and all harbor grievances that periodically explode into open conflict. The Epstein Drive made this complex political situation possible by making the solar system navigable, but it also made the conflicts more dangerous by enabling rapid military response, by allowing fleets to move between planets in days, by giving each faction the technological capability to seriously threaten the others. The same drive efficiency that makes commerce practical also makes warfare practical. The same Delta-V budgets that allow merchant ships to ply the trade routes allow warships to hunt each other across the vast emptiness of space. Beyond Epstein, advanced technologies and new frontiers. For about 150 years after Solomon Epstein's death, his drive remained the pinnacle of human propulsion technology. Engineers refined it, improved its efficiency, scaled it up and down for different applications. But the fundamental principles stayed the same. Fusion-powered magnetic acceleration of exhaust, providing sustained thrust at levels that made the solar system accessible. Nothing that came after fundamentally changed the game the way Epstein's original innovation had. Then came the protomolecule, and everything humanity thought it understood about physics got thrown into question. The protomolecule is alien technology, ancient beyond comprehension, discovered on Saturn's moon Phoebe by human researchers who had no idea what they were dealing with. It's not alive in any conventional sense, but it's not exactly machinery either. It's something in between, or perhaps something entirely outside those categories. Self-organizing, self-replicating, capable of rewriting matter at the molecular level to serve purposes programmed into it billions of years ago by beings that no longer exist. When the protomolecule gets loose, which happens fairly early in the Expanse's timeline, thanks to corporate and military experiments that go catastrophically wrong, it demonstrates capabilities that make the Epstein Drive look primitive. Ships infected or integrated with protomolecule begin exhibiting performance characteristics that shouldn't be possible. The hybrid vessel Eros, an entire asteroid station that the protomolecule converts into a spacecraft, moves in ways that violate conservation of momentum. It accelerates without visible drive plumes, changes direction without reaction mass, achieves velocities that no Epstein-equipped ship could match. The physics are unclear, because the protomolecule doesn't obey physics as humanity understands it. Or rather, it obeys physics, but it has access to principles and mechanisms that human science hasn't discovered. The ships that get protomolecule enhancements become faster, more maneuverable, more efficient in ways that can't be easily measured or replicated. They're using something beyond conventional fusion drives, tapping into energy sources or propulsion methods that remain mysterious, even to the characters who operate them. But the protomolecule's most revolutionary impact on travel isn't improved drives. It's the ring gate network. The gates, built by the long-dead civilization that created the protomolecule, are massive structures that create stable wormholes connecting distant regions of space. The central hub, called the slow zone or ring space, connects to more than 1,300 individual gates, each leading to a different star system. Travel through the gates is effectively instantaneous from the perspective of someone making the journey. You go into one side and come out the other, crossing light years in subjective seconds. This is transportation on a completely different scale than the Epstein Drive enables. Suddenly, humanity has access not just to the solar system, but to 1,300 solar systems, potentially habitable worlds, resources beyond measure. The gold rush that follows makes the belt's exploitation look minor by comparison. Entire fleets of colonist ships head out through the gates, each carrying thousands of people seeking new homes, new opportunities, freedom from the constraints of the old solar system's political structures. But the gates come with their own dangers and limitations. The slow zone in the middle has properties that can kill ships that move too fast, exceed the speed limit, and mysterious defenses that nobody understands and nobody can predict will engage, sometimes destroying ships, sometimes causing them to simply vanish. The gates themselves are ancient technology that humanity barely understands and can't repair. Ships that pass through sometimes don't come out the other side, lost to malfunctions or phenomena that human sensors can't even detect. Moreover, the gates don't eliminate the need for Epstein drives. They connect star systems. But within each system, travel still follows the old rules. You need a drive to get from a planet to its gate. You need delta V to navigate within a system once you've arrived from somewhere else. The gates are shortcuts between systems, not replacements for in-system propulsion. The Epstein drive remains essential, even in the post-gate universe. Some of the worlds beyond the gates have features that further challenge humanity's understanding. Strange phenomena, abandoned structures left by the ring builders, evidence of the civilization that destroyed the ring builders. The protomolecule wasn't the end goal of its creators. It was a tool, a probe designed to prepare worlds for their arrival. And something killed them all, wiped out a civilization that could build wormhole networks spanning vast portions of the galaxy. That something might still be out there, and human expansion through the gates risks attracting its attention. The post-gate era also sees development of new ship technologies that try to incorporate insights from studying protomolecule-infected vessels without actually using protomolecule. These ships remain within the bounds of understandable physics, but they push those bounds further than pre-gate designs. Improved magnetic containment, better fusion reactions, more efficient heat management. All of these advances come from reverse engineering principles observed in hybrid protomolecule ships. The political landscape shifts dramatically with the opening of the gates. Earth's authority becomes even more tenuous when vast new territories open up beyond its reach. Mars's terraforming project, centuries from completion, suddenly seems less relevant when there are potentially habitable worlds waiting beyond the gates. Why spend generations turning Mars into Earth when you can travel through a gate and find an actual Earth-like world ready for colonization? The Belters, who had suffered for generations as the solar system's underclass, suddenly have opportunities for genuine independence. Medina Station, built from the hull of the former Nauvoo in the center of the slow zone, becomes the choke point for gate travel and thus one of the most strategically important locations in human-controlled space. Control Medina, and you effectively control access to all the gate systems. The Belters, through the OPA and its successor Transport Union, gain leverage they never had when they were just asteroid miners. But the expansion also brings new dangers. The gate systems are scattered across the galaxy, far from mutual support. A colony on one side of the network has no way to help a colony on the other side except by traveling back through the slow zone and out again. A journey that might take weeks even with the gates. Pirates and raiders operate in the less settled systems, preying on colonist transports and early settlements. The navies from Earth and Mars can't patrol effectively across 1,300 systems. The frontier becomes genuinely lawless in ways the Belt never was. There are also the lingering mysteries of what the protomolecule was designed to do, and whether it might still be doing it. The consciousness that emerged from the protomolecule's interaction with Detective Miller. A human mind merged with alien technology, served as a guide, and sometimes antagonist, throughout humanity's exploration of the gates. That hybrid consciousness eventually sacrificed itself to protect humanity. But its existence raised questions about the boundaries between biological life, artificial intelligence, and something else entirely. Some researchers continue trying to understand and potentially replicate protomolecule capabilities, despite the obvious dangers. The temptation is enormous. If humanity could truly understand the principles behind ring gate technology, behind the propulsion systems that let protomolecule ships ignore normal physics, it would represent a revolution larger than the Epstein Drive. But every experiment risks letting the protomolecule loose again, risks creating new hybrid horrors, risks attracting the attention of whatever destroyed the ring builders. The Transport Union, which eventually takes control of the Ringgate network, enforces strict rules about what can pass through the gates. Speed limits in the slow zone, shipping schedules to prevent congestion, safety protocols to minimize the risk of activating the gate's defensive systems. These rules create a new kind of infrastructure, a managed network, replacing the free-for-all of early gate exploration. It's practical and necessary, but it also represents centralized control of a kind that the frontier was supposed to leave behind. The Epstein Drive, in this post-gate reality, remains the workhorse of human civilization. It's what gets your ship from planet to gate, from gate to planet, from one location to another within a system. The gates are revolutionary, opening up vast new territories, but they don't replace the need for conventional propulsion. If anything, they increase the importance of having reliable, efficient drives, because now ships are operating in systems without established infrastructure, without repair facilities, without the support networks that exist in the old solar system. The combination of Epstein drives and ring gates creates a civilization spread across light years, but still connected, still able to communicate and trade and wage war on each other, despite the vast distances involved. It's a future that Solomon Epstein never could have imagined when he climbed into his yacht for that fatal test flight. His innovation opened the solar system. The protomolecule opened the galaxy. Together, they gave humanity access to resources and opportunities and dangers on a scale that earlier generations could only dream about. The hard reality of space. Why the Expanse's realism matters. In a genre filled with faster-than-light travel, artificial gravity, and energy shields, The Expanse stands out for its commitment to realistic physics and the brutal constraints of space travel. Ships don't make whooshing sounds in the vacuum because there's no air to carry sound. They don't bank into turns like atmospheric fighters because there's no air resistance to push against. Gunfights don't happen across vast distances because bullets and even railgun slugs take time to reach their targets, time in which an alert ship can evade. Combat is about calculations and geometry, not reflexes and dogfighting skills. This realism serves multiple purposes. First, it creates genuine tension. When the Rocinante is being pursued by hostile ships, the danger is mathematical. Do they have enough delta V to reach safety before the enemies catch them? Can they survive the high G burns required to escape? Will their PDCs successfully intercept incoming torpedoes, or will one get through and tear the ship apart? The answers depend on physics, on numbers that don't care about the crew's courage or determination. They either have enough fuel or they don't. The enemy torpedoes either have enough delta V to catch them or they don't. The drama comes from watching characters make life or death decisions within constraints that feel real and unforgiving. Second, the realism grounds the political and social conflicts in understandable terms. Belters aren't poor because they're lazy or less capable. They're poor because the physics of gravity and economic exploitation combine to keep them permanently disadvantaged. Mars's military advantages come from real technological superiority and the delta V benefits of operating from a lower gravity world. Earth's dominance comes from population and industrial scale that offset its physical disadvantages. These aren't arbitrary choices by the writers. They're natural consequences of the physics that govern the universe. Third, the focus on realistic space travel creates a sense of how difficult and dangerous it actually is to live and work in space. Every journey risks mechanical failure, navigation errors, running out of fuel, or encountering hostiles with no escape. Ships are fragile containers separating humans from vacuum that will kill them in seconds. The juice keeps you alive during high G burns, but at significant cost to your body. Even routine operations carry risks that would be unthinkable on Earth. This danger makes the characters' achievements meaningful. When the Rocinante crew survives another impossible situation, it's not because of plot armor or magical technology. It's because they understood the physics, made good decisions, and got a little lucky. When they fail, when crew members die or ships are lost, it's because space is fundamentally hostile. And even good decisions sometimes aren't enough. The realism raises the stakes in ways that fantasy physics can't. The attention to realistic detail also serves the world building. The differences between Earth, Mars, and the Belt are logical extensions of the different gravity environments and the technology available to each. The way ships are designed, with living spaces stacked along the thrust axis, follows naturally from the need to use the drive to create artificial gravity. The economic importance of the belt comes from the delta V efficiency of operating in low gravity. All of these details fit together into a coherent picture of what human civilization might actually look like if we colonized the solar system with technology only slightly beyond what we currently possess. The Expanse's universe feels possible in a way that most space opera doesn't. You can imagine this being humanity's actual future. Imagine ships like the Rocinante being built in our lifetime. Imagine the political conflicts between Earth, Mars, and the Belt emerging naturally as we expand beyond our home world. The protomolecule and ring gates introduce more speculative elements, but even those are handled with attention to consequence and limitation. The gates don't solve all problems. They create new ones. The protomolecule is powerful, but also terrifying and poorly understood. Even the fantastic elements are constrained by a kind of internal logic that keeps them from feeling like magic. This grounding in reality makes the emotional beats hit harder. When characters suffer or die in the expanse, it matters because we understand the physics that killed them. When the crew faces impossible choices about whether to burn Delta V for safety or save it for later needs, we understand the dilemma because we understand what running out of fuel means. When someone has to ride out a brutal high-G burn, injected with chemicals that will make them sick afterward, we feel their suffering because we understand that this is the price of fast travel in a universe that doesn't care about human comfort. The series also doesn't shy away from showing that technology creates as many problems as it solves. The Epstein Drive opened the solar system, but it also made warfare more practical, enabled exploitation of the belt, and allowed political conflicts to span billions of kilometers. The ring gates offered access to new worlds, but also scattered humanity across distances that make unified government impossible, and exposed Earth to dangers from beyond the solar system. Every advance comes with costs, and the series honestly depicts those costs, rather than pretending that better technology automatically creates better societies. From a storytelling perspective, the realistic constraints force creative problem-solving. Characters can't just technobabble their way out of problems, or rely on magical devices that conveniently solve whatever challenge they face. They have to work within the physics, use the tools and resources actually available to them, and accept that sometimes there aren't good solutions. This makes the moments when they do find solutions more satisfying, because they feel earned rather than contrived. The realism also allows the series to explore themes about human nature and society without the distraction of fantasy elements. Strip away faster-than-light travel and energy weapons, and what you're left with is humans being human, making the same mistakes, fighting over the same resources, forming the same political structures we've always formed. The technology is different, but the fundamental dynamics of power, exploitation, conflict, and cooperation remain recognizable. The Expanse uses its realistic science fiction setting to tell fundamentally human stories about class struggle, colonialism, the cost of war, the search for meaning, and the question of whether humanity can overcome its worst impulses. Conclusion: The legacy of Solomon Epstein. We've journeyed through the physics, the technology, the biology, and the culture that define the Expanse's universe. We've explored how one man's accidental discovery transformed human civilization, opening up the solar system in ways that had seemed impossible. We've examined the brutal realities of high-G acceleration and the chemical cocktails that keep crews alive when physics tries to crush them. We've seen how the distribution of gravity and resources created distinct human cultures that can barely coexist despite their mutual dependence. The Epstein Drive stands as one of science fiction's most important technological innovations, not because it's the most powerful or the most exotic, but because it's grounded in plausible physics and because its implications are followed through consistently. Solomon Epstein didn't set out to change the world. He was just trying to make his yacht a little more efficient, but his innovation, bought with his life, gave humanity the stars. There's something poetic about the fact that Epstein's body is still out there, still accelerating through interstellar space at approximately 5% of light speed, moving faster than anything else humanity has created without alien technology. He became part of his invention, his final resting place a testament to the power of the technology he unleashed. Every ship that burns through space using his drive, every crew member who rides out a high-G acceleration, every colonist who reaches a new world, they're all part of Epstein's legacy. He died alone, crushed by forces he couldn't control, killed within hours by the very success of his innovation. But his death made possible a future where humanity spreads across the solar system and beyond. The tragedy is that this expansion hasn't made humanity better. We're still fighting the same wars, still exploiting the powerless, still struggling with the same greed and violence and tribalism that has plagued us throughout history. The belt miners suffer under economic oppression that would be familiar to colonial subjects from Earth's history. Mars and Earth play power games that echo every imperial rivalry humanity has ever fought. The gate rush to new worlds repeats the same patterns of conquest and exploitation that characterized Earth's age of exploration. But there's also hope in the Expanse's vision of the future. Humanity survives. We overcome the crises that threaten to destroy us. We adapt to environments that should kill us. We build societies in places where no life should exist. The same technology that enables warfare also enables cooperation. The same drives that power battleships also power relief vessels bringing aid to disaster zones. The same physics that make space so dangerous also make it navigable, turning the impossible vastness of the solar system into something humans can actually traverse and inhabit. The juice, that cocktail of chemicals that lets humans survive acceleration that should liquefy them, represents both the promise and the cost of space travel. Yes, we can go fast enough to make the solar system feel small, but we pay for that speed with our bodies, with the brutal physics of acceleration, with the aftermath of drugs that keep us functional at terrible cost. There's no free lunch in space. Every advantage comes with a price. The realism of the Expanse's universe matters because it reminds us that the future won't be easy or comfortable. or free from the constraints of physics. If we do expand beyond Earth, if we do build colonies on Mars and stations in the belt, and settlements on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, it will be hard. People will suffer. Some will die. The technology will be sophisticated, but it won't be magic. Ships will break down. Drives will fail. Calculations will be wrong. And people will have to deal with those failures using whatever resources they have at hand, with no guarantee of rescue or survival. But it also suggests that we can do it, that humanity has the capability to overcome the challenges of living in space, to adapt to environments fundamentally hostile to our biology, to create societies and cultures that work despite the incredible difficulties. The Belters prove that humans can adapt to low gravity across generations, creating a new branch of humanity optimized for space living. The Martians prove that we can maintain focus on multi-generational projects, working toward goals we might not live to see completed. Even Earth, with all its problems and political dysfunction, proves that the home world remains relevant and vital despite the expansion into space. The political conflicts between the three major factions, while often violent and destructive, also represent humanity grappling with fundamental questions about justice, independence, and the distribution of resources. These aren't trivial disagreements. They're about who gets to control the fruits of expansion, who benefits from new technology, whether the old powers get to maintain their dominance, or whether new societies can forge their own paths. The fact that these conflicts happen through negotiation and politics as often as through warfare suggests that humanity hasn't completely lost its capacity for peaceful resolution of differences. The introduction of the protomolecule and the ring gates adds another layer to this already complex picture. Suddenly, humanity faces not just internal conflicts, but external mysteries and dangers. The protomolecule proves we're not alone in the universe, that other intelligences existed long before us and might exist still. The ring builder civilization, advanced beyond human comprehension, was destroyed by something even more powerful and mysterious. This cosmic context makes humanity's internal squabbles seem smaller, while also raising the stakes. If we can't learn to work together, we might face the same fate as the ring builders. Yet even in the face of cosmic horror and ancient alien threats, humans remain fundamentally human. We're brave and cowardly, generous and selfish, visionary and short-sighted. The characters in The Expanse aren't heroes in the traditional sense. They're people trying to survive, trying to do what they think is right, often failing, sometimes succeeding, always dealing with consequences they didn't anticipate. James Holden's idealism gets people killed as often as it saves them. Amos Burton's violence solves problems and creates new ones. Naomi Nagata's brilliant engineering saves the day repeatedly, but she also has to live with the consequences of decisions she made before she joined the Rocinante's crew. The focus on realistic physics and engineering grounds all of these human stories in a universe that feels tangible and consistent. When characters make decisions about delta-V budgets or high-G burns, or whether they can reach a destination before their air runs out, we understand the constraints they're working within. This makes their triumphs more meaningful and their failures more tragic, because they're not arbitrary. The physics doesn't care about narrative convenience or dramatic timing. It just is, and characters have to work within those constraints or die. The evolution of drive technology across the series, from standard Epstein drives to protomolecule-enhanced vessels to whatever comes next, reflects humanity's constant drive to push boundaries and overcome limitations. We're never satisfied with good enough. We always want faster, more efficient, more powerful. This drive for improvement is both humanity's greatest strength and a source of constant danger. The protomolecule wouldn't have been unleashed if corporations and militaries hadn't been experimenting with alien technology they didn't understand. The ring gates wouldn't have been opened if researchers hadn't been poking at things they should have left alone. But that same curiosity and willingness to take risks is also what got us into space in the first place. Solomon Epstein embodied this duality. He was just tinkering, just trying to improve his yacht's efficiency. But his curiosity led to a discovery that changed everything. His death was a direct result of his innovation working too well, his success becoming the mechanism of his destruction. Yet his legacy is overwhelmingly positive. Without the Epstein Drive, humanity would still be confined to the inner solar system, still struggling with travel times measured in years, still unable to economically exploit the vast resources of the outer system. His sacrifice, unintentional though it was, gave his species the solar system and eventually the galaxy. In the end, the Expanse's vision of space travel is both cautionary and inspirational. It warns us that expansion into space won't solve our problems, won't make us better people, won't eliminate the conflicts and inequalities that plague us on Earth. But it also shows us that we can do it anyway, that humanity has the capability to survive and even thrive in environments that should kill us, to build societies in places where life shouldn't exist, to reach across the vast emptiness and create something enduring. The drives that push our ships across the solar system, from the revolutionary Epstein to the mysterious protomolecule enhancements, are more than just technology. They're the physical embodiment of humanity's refusal to be constrained by our limitations, our determination to reach beyond our grasp, our willingness to pay the terrible costs that come with exploring the unknown. Every crew member who injects the juice before a high-G burn, every pilot who calculates a flip and burn trajectory, every navigator who carefully manages their Delta-V budget, they're all participating in the legacy that Solomon Epstein left behind. The juice flows through their veins. Chemical courage that lets fragile human bodies survive forces that should destroy them. The drives burn at their backs, fusion fire pushing them across distances that dwarf anything our ancestors could have imagined. The Delta-V calculations run in their computers, cold math determining whether they live or die, whether they reach their destination or drift forever in the endless black. And through it all, humanity persists, adapts, survives, and sometimes even thrives. This is the reality of space travel in the expanse. No warp drives to cheat the distances, no artificial gravity to make ships comfortable, no energy shields to protect against weapons. Just humans, physics, and the technology we develop to work within the constraints that reality imposes. It's harder than most science fiction suggests, more dangerous, more brutal, but it's also more achievable, more grounded in the possible, more connected to the universe we actually inhabit. The Epstein Drive opened the solar system. The ring gates opened the galaxy. But the real story has always been about the humans who use these technologies, who suffer the consequences of high-G acceleration, who make the calculations and take the risks and pay the costs. Space travel in the expanse is magnificent and terrible in equal measure. It's a triumph of human ingenuity and a reminder of our physical fragility. It's liberation from Earth's gravity well and submission to the brutal physics of acceleration and delta V. Every ship that burns through the black, every crew that rides out a crushing acceleration, every colonist who travels through a ring gate to a new world, they're writing the next chapter of human history. They're carrying Solomon Epstein's legacy forward, proving that his accidental discovery and tragic death meant something, that the sacrifice of one engineer in a yacht changed the trajectory of human civilization forever. The drives hum, the juice flows, the delta V calculations run their course, and humanity, fragile and stubborn and endlessly curious, continues its expansion into a universe that doesn't care whether we live or die, that offers no promises and no guarantees, that tests us with every journey and every decision. We survive not because we're special or protected, but because we're adaptable, because we're willing to endure hardship for the sake of reaching just a little bit further, because we refuse to accept that the vast emptiness should remain forever beyond our reach. This is the Epstein legacy. This is the reality of the juice. This is what it means to navigate space with drives that follow the laws of physics and bodies that break under acceleration, and minds that calculate delta V budgets with the knowledge that one mistake means death. It's not comfortable or safe or easy, but it's real as science fiction can make it. And that reality is what makes the Expanse's vision of humanity's future so compelling and so believable. The moon rises over some distant station, light reflecting off metal and ice. Ships burn through the darkness, trails of fusion fire marking their passage. Crews inject the juice and strap into crash couches, preparing for acceleration that will make their bodies weigh more than they ever thought possible. Navigators calculate trajectories and delta V budgets, hoping their math is right, knowing their lives depend on it. And somewhere, Far beyond the solar system's edge, Solomon Epstein's body continues its eternal journey, the longest funeral in human history, a monument to the man who changed everything. His drive gave us the stars. The juice keeps us alive long enough to reach them. And delta V, that fundamental currency of space, determines whether we make it back home or join Epstein in his endless voyage through the dark. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the physics and realities of space travel in the expanse, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps me know that you want more of this kind of detailed exploration of science fiction universes. And it helps the channel reach other people who might enjoy these deep dives into world building and the technical details that make fictional universes feel real. Until next time, sleep well and remember, fear the juice, respect the delta V, and never, ever run out of fuel in the big empty. The vacuum doesn't care about your story or your dreams. It just waits, patient and eternal, for physics to make its next claim. Safe travels, and may your burns be smooth and your calculations correct. Good night.